Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yay. We've got the band back together and we're doing it. Here we are, everyone. It's our season 1 review of Doctor Who, and it's going to be a cracker. So
Space Babies. Can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah.
Oh, not that. You meant the other season one. Okay,
Edit that out, John. Edit that out.
We will be analysing Rogue in every detail within a few minutes. Gary
Wrong
is
season one.
That's everyone switched off now, John. Just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going.
Why have we only got one sub? It's Shooty. Oh, right. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us again. As you know, we've gone through each story from season 1 of Doctor Who in 1963. Let's clarify that. Today we are looking back, and we're going to be talking about our rankings for season 1, and also talking about some of our favourite bits, and throwing in a few comedy elements along the way as well. So, first of all, let's do a brief rundown, say hello to everybody. We've got our legend, Paul Murray, over there, far away from me. How you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm not too bad. How are you, John?
Oh, living the dream. It's Saturday. I'm happy. And Sarah, down in the bottom corner. It's like Celebrity Squares today.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Very happy to be back.
Yeah.
Hi,
And
Sarah. How you doing? You all right?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm raring to go on this one.
she's showing off of her Doctor Who pictures in the background, because she likes to do that just to wind me up. It's disgraceful, really. And then on the other side,
she's got the pink curtain in honor of the Candyman.
Yeah, exactly.
25 just came in.
Yeah, and then, well, exactly. And just to get her back, I'm just going to do that.
Well, talking of season 25, I was lucky enough to get one of these little beauties. And you can see, look at that. And it doubles as a deodorant as well.
I was going to say, does it have like a little, at the side of it, does it have like a little kind of toilet paper roll on the side?
Yeah, it should have. Yes, it should have. Yes. Yes. It's Davos's Kimball. That's what it is.
Yes, right. And then just below me, is Retro Doc Gary Akers. Hello, how are you, mate?
Hello. I just want to say I'm very sad today because I ordered a special one sash in honor of our review show, but it didn't arrive in time.
Yeah, well, I've been working on my Sensorite beer gut as well, to be honest. So, it's special. It really is. I think what we'll do first of all, we'll talk about our favourite episodes for series 1. Okay, so we'll go around and we can all jump in as we do it. But first of all, Paul, what's your rankings for season 1? What are your thoughts?
I found watching this season, it's a great season, but I have found the thing that I enjoyed the most were the historical stories. So in my ranking, they're quite high up. So my favourite one, my top favourite, surprise, surprise, and you know what's coming, John. I've told you this already. Even though it doesn't exist, I don't know if I'll be disappointed. I'm prepared to be disappointed if something gets discovered, but Marco Polo is my top favourite from season 1. It's superb.
Yeah. And Sarah?
Oh, God, how am I going to top this? Yeah, rewatching it, Paul's absolutely right. It is the historicals that really stand out. And again, I think Marco Polo is on that pedestal. So I'd have to agree that would be my top one. Unfortunately, we haven't got it. So my second choice would be, and purely because it's the iconic one, it's got to be the Daleks. Cracking story. Every character's got something to do. Yeah, okay, it's a bit long, but I can forgive that for what it means. It's history in the making. It's a cornerstone of Doctor Who on TV. So it's only right, if Marco Polo doesn't exist in the morning, it's only right that the Daleks has that top spot.
Yeah.
If only E. Levina got in with Marco Polo, that'd be really good.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Gary?
Let's see. 3 favorite episodes would be episode 2 of Edge of Destruction, episode 5 of Keys of Mirror. Oh, you don't mean episode, you mean stories. Okay, sorry. I was tempted to. Well, okay, I agree with Paul that in terms of, it's weird to say, well, that a story that I've never seen, in its original form is the best, but just in terms of such a monumentally epic story, and from the audio scene and the pictures and the colors and all that, it's just an amazingly well crafted story, kind of the template for every historical story after that. I think second, I think I'll probably go with the Aztecs. I was very tempted to say Unearthly Child just because of that first episode.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had to rank the first episode of Unearthly Child like by itself, that would probably be the best of the season. But Aztecs, I think, just for the interplay of the four, they all have something really solid to do in that. A lot of iconic moments. So,
Aztecs was my second one as well, Gary. So yeah,
the original historicals were just really strong.
Yeah, I mean, it's no surprise, guys. I mean, similar to what you've said, Paul, and what Gary said, and riffing on what you've said, Sarah. But for me, it's Marco Polo is number one for me, and it's no surprise that Aztecs is second for me, and then I would say the Daleks. I've always loved the Daleks, and to be honest, I've always kind of ranked the Daleks at number one because it's the Daleks, similar to what Sarah was saying. But just listening back to Marco Polo again, and also the Aztecs, this is a TARDIS crew at these points where they are kind of really clicking together. And it's working so well. Granted, the Aztecs, as we've talked about, they're blimming stupid in it.
I didn't realize we were doing three. So yeah, Aztecs.
Yeah, go for it.
Aztecs would have been my third. The only reason why I've rated it slightly less than the Daleks is just because what I said in the review about Susan didn't really have much, but obviously we know that's because Caroline Ford was on holiday. I'm trying to think objectively that all four actors have got something to do. But Aztecs, it's a cracking story. It deserves to be in the top three for sure.
Well, it's interesting, John, you mentioned you, because my three are Marco Polo, Aztecs, and the Daleks. But mainly because I do like historicals, as I said already. But Marco Polo, it's funny, although it doesn't exist, I've heard it so many times, I feel like I've seen it. I could go along the dialogue while I was listening to it on my iPod or wherever. It's just so good, it really is.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, if they announced that they'd recovered it and they were releasing it tomorrow, I would be absolutely over the moon. But there's something about Marco Polo where it's your mind eye really grows the world and the story for me, the imagination of what they're doing, and just the narration as well from Marco Polo. I said on the review, it kind of feels almost like a bit of a Michael Palin-esque story that they're going for, traveling across. It's really well done, I think. But I will say, just below there, I've got, from watching it back again with you guys as well, I have actually got a soft spot for Keys of Marinus as well. But for a concept, I think the concept is fantastic. And there's, as we talked about on the review, there's a lot of moral dilemmas that could be discussed and fleshed out further there. But it also has, by far for me, the best death scene ever in Doctor Who, just with the Voord falling into the acid.
No, you're absolutely right, Johnny. Yeah, that would be my number 4, just for the sheer scale. I mean, it's like this. I mean, with season 2 with the Web Planet, in terms of concept, you can't get much higher than Keys of Marinus. Yeah, every episode is like another genre.
Yeah,
it's got it's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah,
and the narrative threads don't all work. No, but I think seeing that on paper, it'd be like, wow, this is amazing. How on earth are we going to do this?
brilliant stuff. And I was going to say to you all, I mean, and let's talk about it. I mean, because it's interesting where the majority of us haven't picked the Daleks. We picked the historicals, which were great, but arguably, if the Daleks hadn't come about, would Doctor Who have been as big as it became without
Probably
the Daleks?
Not. No.
Yeah.
No.
So we've gone in a different direction there, but you know, you're never going to take the Daleks out of the top 3, are you? It's just iconic, isn't it? You know, just those creatures, the way that they appear on the screen is just breathtaking.
Well, the thing about the Daleks is that, I mean, arguably, it probably has one of the top, like, iconic moments of not only the season, but of Doctor Who history, which is the end of episode 1, where
when the plumber arrives, that's right.
Where Barbara's going, and you don't know what it is. I mean, that alone, it might even be that moment that secured the future of the show, because everybody was tuning in and saying, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The thing about the story as a whole, though, as with a lot of other season stories, a little bit longish. It's kind of like, as a story, it's kind of like slow and steady. There's no like peaks of excitement that come every so often. It's basically just kind of like a steady kind of
just creeps along.
You know, it kind of creeps along without, those. Well, like I said, with the exception of the end of episode 1, like the big like shock moments, maybe the claw, underneath the tarp.
Yeah.
But it's mostly just kind of like a very steady paced.
And I think they could have lost an episode on that. Do you agree on that? I think they could have trimmed it down.
Possibly a couple. Yeah.
And I think, you can't dismiss how great it was and how great it is, but because of how it put the show into the atmosphere, really. But it's just, I mean, like I say, Marco Polo, again, for me as a kid, I didn't get to hear Marco Polo in the 80s, if I'm honest. I didn't hear any audios. It was years before I actually listened to Marco Polo, because if I'm honest, I was a lad growing up, and I was like, no, I'm going to stick with the VHSs. I'm going to stick with the DVDs. And then I hit a point, and I think it was probably more when Big Finish kicked off that I started going, let's go back to the audios and listen to them as well. And I started loving it. And it just, I do not get bored of Marco Polo. It literally, I can literally, and I did, I went to bed, turned the lights out, and I just drifted away listening to Marco Polo. Superb stuff. And that gets a seal of approval from me, So
I have the same problem with the censor rates, John, to be honest.
That's only because you're dreaming of beer gut one sash,
Yes. The first elder.
The master of disguise.
Yeah. I mean, Gary's right.
My first, my first exposure to Marco Polo was the Target book, because, we used to get the Target books when the Target books eventually started appearing over here fairly, and you could get them in places other than like import bookshops and stuff. Was the Target book, and just kind of, which even read like a travelogue, as they're kind of, going through and everything. I mean, in some ways it was kind of a bold choice for the very first historical. I mean, 7 episodes of basically kind of just them traveling, along with it, when they're still basically kind of trying to establish what the show was going to be, as opposed to maybe a story with a little bit more action in it, like, the Aztecs or something like that. But
there's a lot of intrigue in Marco Polo, mainly with Tagana being the villain in it.
Yeah.
And I think one thing about it, and we always say this, it's a bit of a cliche, that it was never meant to be listened to or watched in one big block. It was a weekly serial. And that makes a huge difference. Occasionally I do binge watch Hartnell stories, but then I think maybe I should watch it, savor it over a couple of nights, even just to not have that lag.
Well, that's how I've had to, get to that, because it's very, it's laborious trying to binge watch it, and you don't get the same viewing experience. So these episodes are meant to be savoured, and it completely changes it.
Yeah,
the one thing I that, and this is especially true for the the 60s stories, is back in the day, if you're a viewer, you never knew how long the story was going to last. I mean, now we have, enough Doctor Who episode guides that would fill a warehouse, and we know, even now, we know, oh, here's all the titles for every story in the season. But back then, I mean, if you get to week 6 of Marco Polo, you still have no idea that you might have, several more to go, or the censor rights. It's like, well, how many more? It's basically, and they were also.
I think we prayed for death, though, Gary. If you thought the censor episode or something,
I knew somebody was going to say that, but it was, and they're all interconnected. So it's basically one long, unending narrative that just happens to switch focus and places every so often, but you just kind of have to watch it week to week with no idea about, is this going to be the end of this story or the beginning of the next or whatever. And I'm always thinking about that, because that has to change kind of how you took it in, because that lack of like foreknowledge of how the season was going to be structured must have been really something.
Even with the foreknowledge, guys, if it's interesting, when you watch it in marathon form, per season, per story kind of thing, it gives you a different insight as well, I think, as a fan, because you're seeing it in context rather than grabbing the odd story here and there to watch on a whim. Watching this in that structure of the whole season gives a different feel to it, I think. I don't know if you agree on that, guys.
Yeah, no, I do agree. Absolutely.
I think it stops you taking it for granted, and as a modern Doctor Who fan, I think I kind of was. It's going to be this format, these many stories. And then when I watched series 1 for the first time, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know the number of stories, or I'd forgotten. So I actually got a little bit of whiplash, especially with Edge of Destruction being so short in between the two longer stories. But that were nice, because it kept me on my toes.
Yeah. I think I was also going to sort of talk to all of you as well about, also let's talk about the main characters, the TARDIS crew for season 1. Now, I said on one of our recordings, I said, for years, my favorite companion character was the Doctor in season 1. But I changed that through watching it again with all of you, because I kind of felt Ian was my standout for that first season, because, Ian does take the initiative, certainly early on. Ian is the one that's pushing to, keeping the morale high and trying to keep things going. Because again, I go back to that first story, and it's not the Doctor when they're in the cave. It's Ian that's trying to get everyone out of it in the cave, because the Doctor, he's kind of, at one point, he's kind of given up, hasn't he? So Ian really is a pivotal character for that first season. And William Russell, hats off to him. I mean, he played that role so well. I mean, he's brave, he's resourceful, and he's practical as well, isn't he? He's great.
The thing about this, he's a science teacher. He's not a gym teacher, a PE teacher, is he? That made more sense. He's very physical, very active man.
He's not the traditional hero, but he is the hero of the team.
I think that if they had any whiff of what he'd been up to, they would have been doing an investigation into his school activities, because quite frankly, he's saying to everybody else he's teaching them science, but for all we know, he's doing like combat you know,
Well, they must have
in that class.
classes and fencing and stuff like that, John.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know, it's like today, class, we're not going to be using the Bunsen burners. We're going to be doing Aztec warrior fighting.
I'm sure that we never heard it, but I'm sure that he also doubled as the PE teacher.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
Job sharing. Yeah.
Today, class, you're going to climb across this rope ladder from the science lab to the PE sports hall. Okay.
And then we'll cut the bridge, and you have to freeze something to get across again. Yeah.
You boys over there, you have to dress like medieval knights, and you have to chase them.
It's like you two. All right, you two are going to wrestle each other, but I'm going to kind of like knock one of you kind of out a little bit, so you'll be at a distance.
With a Vulcan pinch.
So you,
yeah. And I mean, what are your thoughts on characters, the TARDIS crew sort of rankings for season 1? You know, are you similar to me with it being Ian, all of you, or have you got a different view?
Well, Hartnell's still my favourite actor in it because I think he's superb. I love that sort of that transition he goes through from being a bit of a spoilt child, wants his own way, to becoming much more friendlier and softer, but he's still quite spiky by Reign of Terror. But, I think Jacqueline Hill as Barbara, she really, really sells it. And it just, I think we said this in our reviews already, that there's a kind of a cliche thing about 60s companions being weak, but she's not at all. She's a very, very strong character, and that's something I admire in Jackie Hill's performance.
Yeah, I mean, even from story 3's Edge of Destruction, I mean, she tears a strip off the Doctor, and she's absolutely bloody right. And he has to go and sheepishly apologise. And I think, Edge of Destruction is actually quite a favourite of mine. I mean, compared to the historicals, I suppose it's a bottle episode, but there's so much character development in those 2 episodes, especially with the Ian Barbara Doctor and relationship. And I love how towards the end, it's Ian who the Doctor confides in. He's like, we haven't got, we've got no time left. This is what's going to happen. And it's just an amazing moment, I think, for all of them that they bonded, after the Daleks, and it kind of cements them going forward. I mean, what you've said, John, I completely agree. It's difficult choosing between Ian and the Doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably would have been, but if Barbara hadn't been so stupid in the Aztecs, I might have gone for her.
Well, she can't be that stupid, Sarah. In the Edge of Destruction, she must be a member of Mensa.
I know.
The TARDIS is trying to tell them, it's so obscure.
Just I would say probably, but I mean, obviously, Susan's the worst offender for being, inconsistently written.
Yeah.
But I would say it's. I can't choose between Ian and the Doctor. They're both equally my favourites.
Well, I mean,
I think that, if you look at the season as a whole, it's an interesting dynamic because for those first 3 stories, the Doctor is arguably the anti-hero. He is not, Ian is the main protagonist. Ian and Barbara are the protagonists, in that story. And, especially in that initial trilogy of stories, it's almost as if, we don't know how long the Doctor and Susan had been stuck on Earth, but it's almost like they've forgotten how to travel in the TARDIS because they make a lot of dumb mistakes and all of that. It's like they have to relearn what it's like to actually be able to travel in time. And
wait till we get to season 2, Gary.
What?
Wait till we get to season 2, Gary.
and like Sarah said, it's like that last episode of Edge of Destruction basically almost like resets the show into a form where their interactions are more like what we are familiar with, where they're like a crew together. And I think throughout the whole season, I agree with John that, Ian is the main character because for all of the stories, the Doctor's not necessarily the driving force in all the stories. I mean, he's there making, deductions throughout, but he's not put in a prominent position to where all the other ones are secondary.
Yeah.
It's like they're all still, it's still very much an ensemble show. It's not about the Doctor and his companions.
Absolutely.
So that changes the dynamic from what we're used to. But yeah, Ian is it's great no matter what they throw him into. I mean, whether he can be like on trial, or that he has to fight an Aztec warrior, or he has to be like Columbo, he has to be Columbo or something. It's like no matter what they give him to do, he can or he has to be kind of like a spy and figure out what's going on with at the revolution. So, and I would say honestly, for me, I think I agree. Barbara is even with some of her bonehead mistakes throughout the season, a lot of the really memorable dialogue bits, confrontation bits, are with Barbara, as Sarah said. Where she reads the Doctor the riot act in Edge of Destruction, where she and the Doctor, you can't change history, not one line in the Aztecs. So a lot of the memorable moments belong to Barbara as well, which is interesting. That, like I said, the Doctor is there really to either provide conflict or help with, or our comedy. The comedy bits are for Hartnell.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the character is not the prominent person that we think he is.
I was also going to say about the Doctor as well, because where you're saying about, he's the anti-hero, and that's right. Even when you get to the Sensorites, he isn't concerned about saving the day. All he wants to do is go about his business, really, because if you recall in the Sensorites, he still says, when they're unconscious, he says, "Oh, let's get back in the TARDIS."
Yeah, just leave him.
Yeah. He's not at all interested in it whatsoever. No. And he has to strop in Reign of Terror, and then he goes after them looking, but he's kind of happier there because it's his favorite era. So he's kind of chomping at the bit to play the role, isn't he? But
if he had left at that point, John, on the spaceship and the Sensorites, it'll be one episode long, which would be a if the Sensorites didn't steal the lock, it's their fault. That stay there for 6 weeks.
But
if they would have just turned around and looked 3 feet away to see the Sensorite burning out the lock, the story would have been over.
Yeah, it's so interesting though, because again, with Modern Who, you just take it for granted that the Doctor's going to land in this situation. He's going to save the day. He has become like this more heroic figures, especially since 2005 onwards, and it's just fascinating. Like you say, all he wants to do is get back to the TARDIS. Yeah. No, we're not getting involved.
The only time I can remember something similar in New Who was in that Kill the Moon, where Capaldi's Doctor basically he clears off and leaves them to make the decision. And that is very similar to like a First Doctor in the early stages, really, where
but Hartnell wouldn't have come back, would he?
No, he wouldn't have known how to come back, would he?
Exactly,
and Hartnell wouldn't have allowed a companion to slap him. He'd have been there with his stick.
Yeah. And I think, because where I say about he would go, you flip on to season 2 and where you got the Dalek invasion of Earth, and he actually says to them when he finds out it's the Daleks, we must confront them and defeat them. That's where you start seeing that's more of the Doctor we know going forward, where he'll get involved in it, and it's not just an adventure for him. There's some things he has to get involved in, and Hartnell, his development throughout season 1, it is wonderful to watch. We've talked about it on the reviews, but you've got an unearthly child where he's literally trying to bludgeon someone to death with his rock. And then he's still got that selfish element in the Daleks. He's still got that in other elements.
Well, it's his fault. They were there.
Yeah. So he does that, but then he mellows out a bit. I'm going to say a bit because I don't think the First Doctor ever truly mellows out. But he does as he goes along. But he learns, and you were saying a few minutes ago about his relationship with Barbara. I would argue as well now that perhaps the Doctor and Barbara's relationship is probably the strongest of that four, because you're right about those arguments they have. So she gets in on him on Edge of Destruction, and he gets in on her on the Aztecs. Now they start almost building that respect for each other.
Yeah, good respect. By the time they get to season 2, Barbara becomes cleaner by that point, hasn't she?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, spring clean the TARDIS, why don't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's some things looking back as well. We hear more about the fact that the Doctor is an engineer, which it's not really picked up again, is it? Until we get to Pertwee, when he's tinkering with stuff.
What? It's so funny that you say that, John, because literally just now I was thinking about, like how would you characterize what the Doctor is in this season? Obviously, Pertwee's a scientist. I mean, if I had to pick one word for, it's always the things that captured his attention were always scientific based.
Yeah.
And that was his role in UNIT, science advisor. But with Hartnell, it's like, occasionally he will display obvious, scientific knowledge. I mean, he's an advanced alien, but I wouldn't characterize him in this season as a scientist, because a lot of what he does in the season, I mean, there's some deduction, there's some of this, there's a little bit of that. There's like diplomacy, there's, like fooling the jailer and the tailor and all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't say that being a scientist is what he primarily is. I mean, please feel free to say that I'm wrong.
I would say, Gary, you're right on that. There's not much of it. I think the two moments for me that stand out really is the Aztecs, when he goes into the TARDIS because he's going to work on a new key and he's going to try and fix the TARDIS. That's one of them. And I think the second one is probably Sensorites, where we get those wonderful scenes where he's in his element finding the cure. But again, that's not engineering. That's not engineering, but it is alluded to in it's Aztecs, isn't it? It's alluded.
He did say he wasn't a doctor of medicine, though, didn't he? That's an interesting.
He did,
yeah. He just what did he do? It's not a doctor of medicine, is he, guys? He just flukes his way of getting a cure in the Sensorites. But I mean,
really, what Hartnell is a bullshit artist. In the best possible way.
Yeah, because it's interesting. Because when I always looked at it, when I watched the Pertwee era, I always thought the third Doctor always said to the Master, "Well, you're the engineer. You tell me." So it almost implies that the Doctor wasn't an engineer, but I'm certain going back through it in Aztecs, he does sort of address that he's an engineer.
But he's probably like Sarah's saying, he's bullshitting here because he didn't do very well at the academy. He only scraped a pass, a contra romana. So he's making it all up, isn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, I really think if I had to pick like one word to describe the Doctor in the season, it would just be a traveler. What Capaldi calls himself later. I mean, that's really what Hartnell is. I mean, he does have, I'm not saying he doesn't have skills that can help him in the situations that he lands in, but, he's primarily right now just a traveler.
Well, you're right, Gary, because, if we were visited by an alien today that was from an advanced civilization, you're talking, millions of years in advance than us. Even if you weren't specifically a scientist, you would still be 2 or 3 steps ahead of people, wouldn't you? At least because of how far ahead in technology and advancement. So I think you're right. I think that he is a traveller, but I still don't know if he is an engineer. I think you're right. You're turning me there, Gary, because I always found in Doctor Who, the Master was always able to sort of have about 4 or 5 TARDISes, which sort of makes it he's an engineer. But the Doctor,
and here's the thing, and this is a little bit of a tangent. I know that because I've colossal fan of.
I like tangents.
The Doctor Who comics that have been in the magazine all these decades, and occasionally you'll get like a flashback story of the Hartnell Doctor on Gallifrey in the Deadly Assassin robes, with the high collars and everything.
Yeah.
And even in those circumstances, that feels. I mean, when I see that, I think, oh, that's kind of cool. But then my second thought is, no, that doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
To see like Hartnell in like the Deadly Assassin Gallifreyan Prydonian robes, there's just something that doesn't. Like
that he would never go
at first I think, oh, that's kind of cool, but then I thought that doesn't fit.
It's too conformist for him.
Yeah, exactly that.
It's taking it off, and well, that's it. I mean, it goes back to everything he said. Where the Time Lords, they're observers. The Doctor doesn't just want to observe; he wants to get stuck in that. He wants to experience it. That's why he loves dressing up and playing the role. Like he did in the Reign of Terror.
Absolutely.
So it is not. Well, I mean, I'd say it's not one to stand on the sidelines, but I think it depends what mode he's in.
Yeah. Depends how crotchety he is.
Yeah.
So talking about sort of villains for season 1, what's everyone's sort of favorite villains from the season 1? Who would you rank as the best of the best for that first season?
I think in terms of, I put the Daleks third on my list. In terms of iconic creation, the Daleks would have to come top for the alien or the monster of the season.
Yeah.
But in terms of human villains, again, gets back to Marco Polo. Tegana's brilliant. Likewise, Tlatoxo as well, and the Aztecs.
Yeah.
The human villains are really, really strong in this season as well.
Yes, and they've both got that scheming, devious, dangerous quality. It's difficult to kind of choose between them. I think you're right, Paul. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's them kind of. You've got to defeat them in a different way. You've got to get one up on them, and it's.
Because if you turn off the electricity, it doesn't stop Tegana.
Yeah, exactly.
And we know that Gary has a big soft spot for one sash.
I was going to say, who my villain is.
Yeah,
it's really sad.
There's something alluring about
my second favorite villain is Susan with the scissors in
She's really effective, actually.
Yeah.
That's what they should have done with Susan. They should have, from that point on, made her like a psycho killer for the
you could have really done something with
evil. He had to watch himself in the shower, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. The human villains are, because honestly, I don't know. It's I don't know if it's the stories don't allow for like a classic villain. That's why I think that the human villains, as Paul said, Totoxel probably would be, my favorite, because as we said,
devious,
because he's devious, and his most dangerous aspect is that he can spin any disadvantage to an immediate advantage. His recovery from being kind of knocked back is about 1.5 seconds before he's already figured out how to spin it again to his advantage. That's dangerous. Yeah. So, to me, that was, plus motivated by the fact that in his own mind, he was doing what he thought was right to save him.
Yeah, he honestly believes he's right, and that makes that was such a nuanced.
Yeah,
That, it's not, and his delivery can be considered a little bit, pantomime.
He does.
But his what his beliefs, so
He's
his
got that.
motivations.
I almost think that a character like that would have benefited Reign of Terror a little bit, to where if they would have had one central antagonist who was, the real danger to the crew kind of escaping with their lives. Because as it stands now, they're just kind of meandering around to different aspects of the revolution. It's like, well, okay, who's the spy? Who's James? What was it? James
Sterling.
James Sterling.
Yeah.
Who's James Sterling? Which isn't, he could be good, he could be bad. They really needed like a Totoxel character to kind of amp it up a little bit, in that story. And probably like Tagana in Marco Polo then would be my second after Totoxel. They still haven't mastered the alien villains yet, because we had the Voord, which wasn't really kind of much of anything.
Oh, Gary, hang on. Yeah,
here we go,
Gary. Look, we talked.
I apologize to lovers of black rubber everywhere. I didn't mean to slam.
Are you
Voord,
telling me, Gary?
That's a different channel, Gary, I think.
Are you telling
that'll
me
be coming up after this stream?
Are you telling me that a Voord that wears somebody else's outfit to look the same but has two big pointy things, as you did on the review, sticking over the top, you're saying that's not a well-crafted villain?
No, what I'm saying
that's
is
outrageous.
It's a good outfit, but not if you try to wear a hoodie over it and think that nobody's going to notice that your hoodie is extending about a foot in either direction.
Went very ghetto Voord then, didn't it, really?
And with one sash, what can you say about one sash? I mean, how they could basically write him off screen at the end. Oh, well, yeah, he's been exiled. When a character like that, you don't have your central antagonist villain in a story and then not show him getting his comeuppance and then just, he's off exiled at the end. It's like, oh, come on. That was a huge leap.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't shut him in a room with the lights on and the music up really loud just to...
Or have a scene where they go up to him and like rip off his sash. Really dramatic, melodramatic, where you're done
around someone else in front of
something like that.
It was, it was disappointing because it was just set up.
Having his beard plucked out one hair at a time. Punishment,
I guess you could call the astronauts in the sewer the kind of villains, but again, that kind of almost felt kind of trotted out at the 11th hour, to wrap up that. And there was unexplained things there, because it's like Ian goes back to find the doctor, and the doctor's obviously been attacked by something. Well, wait, how does that happen? If it was just these astronauts, did they have like a little gardening hoe or something?
Wait, because they'd been there for so long, they didn't have any nail files or nail cutters. It was the nails.
I think they're connected to IMC because they have the same idea.
That's right. I love that story. So
is nobody gonna volunteer the iconic brains in the jars from Keith and Ryan?
The brains of Morpheton.
Let's push them over. So
that really needed to be in color, those things, because I think in color they were red, right? Because I've seen
a great color photographs.
They're red.
Yeah.
And I guess nobody's mentioning the cavemen.
I have a real hard time with the cavemen.
I think I will say in that first story, it's quite graphic when the two cavemen are fighting each other.
Yeah.
That's quite, for what would be classed as a family show at that time, that they are going at it,
Hard on and the first Doctor must have been rubbing his hands when he put the boulder on his head. He must have been very much.
And again, there was that iconic moment when they're escaping.
Yeah, with the trees brushing past them with that.
Yeah, genius.
Yeah.
I think I would say the creepiest part for me in this season is probably the Sensorites first episode, leading into the second episode, because I think, we talked about it and you mentioned it, Paul, when we did the review, but when you see what they're doing to someone's mind, and I also like it where they appear in front of Ian and Barbara. And, there's that slow walk that does go on for about 15 minutes. But
it's the Mickey Mouse feet that does it for me, to be honest.
Yeah.
I thought, John, I thought you meant that you were creeped out by the airline outfits.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yeah. They were on a tour of duty.
Right, John. There's something unsettling about them. I think
when they come up on he comes up on the window.
Yeah. When they first appear, it's like, again, it's like the early Cybermen. There's that inevitability of them. They're going to catch up with you, and they look unsettling. They look humanoid, but they're not.
I mean,
I know the mask could have been better, but it did enough. But it's that psychological what they've done.
And I mean, these days they would have been great on Earth because they would have made a really good business doing car waxing. Because it's perfect, just standing on top of the bonnet, just wax
just
on,
walk
wax
over
on.
the car and you're done.
Don't forget, my niece and nephew are both at university at the minute, and they've gone to Freshers Week, and we have the Sensorites.
They weren't there, were they? The Sensorites weren't in the bar.
The Sensorites were there. They have champion. Have you heard of these silent discos? And I believe the Sensorites are to blame for these.
Yeah.
This is what they do. They come down to Earth. They want to have a good time. They get, they can even have a sash. There's, go to a hen party, nick a sash from a bride to be, absolutely fine. And if the girl gets too much, put the headphones on. Watch your uncle.
I think they had a lot of potential, the Sensorites, in the story, if it was shorter and they kept it on the spaceship. And I think, because a lot of the time I said in the review as well, when you were quite close up, they looked ropey, but further away, just the right perspective was enough.
Yeah, they went down to the planet.
The Utes, didn't they? They became the Sensorites.
Yes.
And that was a lovely development of it. You know what I mean? So
they went down to the planet.
Yeah. Soon as they go down to the planet, it all goes to pot and turns into something else.
And I would say quickly, the historicals make season 1 without a doubt, because at this point, with the exception of Keys and Marinus, they are struggling to make the futuristic stories kind of click.
Yeah.
With the Dalek works because the Daleks are iconic, but I would still say the historicals are what make it.
No, I mean, John, you're absolutely right, because you think about it though, the production of this, the first season, was in 63 and 64. So in terms of their, for lack of a better term, kind of science fiction-y ideas are still really rooted in the 50s.
Yeah.
In terms of, humans versus aliens, what shape the aliens are in. I mean, a lot of, what would develop as science fiction into the 60s really hadn't started yet. So they were really kind of drawing on a lot of stuff from the previous decade. But in terms of, John, I just wanted to add that in terms of creepiness, I want to kind of give a shout out to the ice knights in Keys of Marinus.
Okay.
When they're in the cave, and they start kind of moving. That was that was creepy too.
Yeah, that was good.
Really effective. I mean, I have to say that again, going back to Edge of Destruction, there were some really creepy elements in that, and it's just them that you don't know what this presence is. I think obviously it needed to be developed a bit more, but then you can see like the seed of these like psychological horror kind of thriller vibes. I think it started with that. There was so much potential there, and not the paranoia. You don't know who to trust. So they've been turning on Susan,
Yeah.
I love all that exploration. I wish it had been more than just 2 episodes, because there was a really good idea there.
Yeah, and that's kind of why, to me, the resolution of that kind of felt so anticlimactic, because the setup was good.
Yeah,
we have an intruder. Oh,
exactly.
Well, it could be invisible. We don't know. Whatever, and it was really good. I mean, I guess in those kind of situations, the answer is never as good as what the setup is. But in this case, the fact that it was, kind of like a stuck switch, I guess, is clever for kind of like I'm not using this term pejoratively, kind of like a children's oriented show. I guess it's kind of clever, but compared to the setup, it was just kind of let down.
I think it's a shame because the Doctor and Susan are from a distant planet in the far future. The little spring seems a bit trivial, doesn't it?
It does.
Which is a real shame. But I think the exploration of the TARDIS, having seen that beautiful set and exploring it, was a wonderful treat just for that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, one of my disappointments for season 1, the main one actually, is the development of Susan, because Carol Ann Ford is great, but as we talked about on the reviews of each story, they just didn't flesh out or give her enough meat to work with. And I think, the one I've talked about before is, Sarah, you mentioned about Edge of Destruction, where it kind of begins the thread of Susan having telepathic powers as part of a race, and they're kind of dip in and out of it in season 1, and then you get to the Sensorites where it's kind of brought up. And I thought, I know we talked about it at the time, but I think that should have really been developed more. And I think in Sensorites as well, they should have made more of the fact that the Sensorites aren't able to break the Doctor, and more importantly Susan, because of their telepathic abilities and their mental strengths. I think that would have worked better, but that's just part of history now. But I think they were going to try something with her, but they never got to it in the end, did they? It happens.
The trouble with Susan was the character particularly is because they just treated her like an ordinary teenage girl, and that was a big mistake, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
the first episode is an unearthly child.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they just forgot about.
Yeah.
Look, the point was that Susan was acting different. She got knowledge.
Yeah.
Beyond the years, and they really could have. They could have gone like Tomorrow People. I know that came after, but it's such a missed opportunity.
It should be called the Earthly Child, to be honest. Now, shouldn't
it? The thing for me, I'm always in a weird place about Susan, because the thing about it is, it's like not taking anything away from Carol Ann Ford, who was great and iconic. I'm just talking about. So this has to do with her acting. This is about how the character was written. So I think when with the exceptions that you mentioned, John, so much of the season was, oh, grandfather, which would have been fine.
But crying's a Time Lord trait, though, isn't it, Gary, to be honest?
Well, I was not going to go there. I was going to say, clearly, this episode from this season is what Ncuti looked at to prepare for the role. But all of those kind of, crying and clinging on to, grandfather would have worked, not taking anything away again from Carol Ann Ford, would have worked better if the actress had been the actual age that the character was supposed to be, which was 15.
Yeah.
And that's why you have an actress who's clearly more mature than that age, which is why all of the constant, oh, grandfather, where's grandfather? Just rubs me the wrong way, because it's like, no, you should be a little bit more self-sufficient and
take control.
Independent, which, if the character was Carol Ann Ford's age, she would be, but if it was like a young 15-year-old actress, I could buy her constantly worrying about her grandfather and this, that, and the other thing, which is why, I loved the development in the Sensorites, because finally in that episode, Susan had something to bring to the crew that was distinct from everybody else.
Yes.
Ian had a distinct role to play. Barbara had a distinct role to play, even though she was another human. Her dynamic, with Ian, clearly they had two different perspectives, two different personalities. The way Ian related to the Doctor was very different from the way Barbara related to the Doctor. But in terms of what, she brought to the individual stories, Susan was really shortchanged. Like the writers couldn't figure out what to do with her. So they had her she wasn't even the damsel in distress. It was more of like, oh, grandfather, where's grandfather? Yeah. She had that moment in the Daleks where she has to walk out, and go back, to the, TARDIS by herself. And that was a good moment for her.
That was a good moment.
But then right after the Sensorites, which is probably her last great moment, I think, in the series, she goes right back to, well, we don't know what to do with her, so let's stick her in jail in the Reign of Terror for 4 episodes because we just don't know what to do with her.
She's crying about rats.
And again,
she's insufferable in Reign of Terror.
And like I said, after you go from it's almost as if, I'm not going to go so far as to say, well, there wasn't a story editor who was saying, wait a minute, why can't we be more consistent with this character? But it's like they weren't communicating from one writer to the other how that character should be played. Yeah. And so it was just, the character was done a monumental disservice. And I think it's just because, with a couple of rare exceptions, they just didn't know what to do with her. Other than that, she's the Doctor's granddaughter.
Yeah. And I agree. I would say as well, what I think it missed is it should have been throughout the season. She's growing in her confidence and her mental abilities, and she's taken her grandfather on. So they're arguing more, and he's telling her, and she's like, well, no, they have that one scene in the Sensorites, but there should have been more of that, of saying, I'm taking the initiative now. I'm not a little girl. Yeah. I know what I'm doing, and you have that conflict, which is, like real life. It's a parent and a daughter. They've got to that age where they think they know it all, and then you have that to deal with. But we didn't get that.
We get to that point a little bit when we come to her last story in season 2. We finally get there, but it's a bit too late.
Smack bottom.
Yeah. I was going to say though that I think season 1, if you took Susan out, no disrespect to Daleks and Voord, you wouldn't miss the character at all, because they could easily survive by Barbara and just the Doctor. Yeah, I think she's about necessary because of the way they developed her or didn't develop her.
Well, and also back to Marco Polo just for a minute, I actually think that is a very good story for Susan, because her friendship, with Ping Cho, the two girls of similar ages, that they immediately bond, and their relationship carries on throughout that whole story, is one of the great things about Marco Polo. So again, that was also really a good use of Susan, because for the first time they gave her somebody that she can actually relate to.
As we said during the Aztecs review, Gary, they should have left Susan there after that Ping Chu nonsense. They could have got away in the TARDIS, but she wanted to go and say goodbye.
You're harsh.
Oh, John, you're so harsh.
Or bring Ping Cho on instead of Susan. It's like, oh, we accidentally left Susan with Genghis Khan.
Apparently, you don't behave, Susan. You'll be the one marrying him. I always think when I see how the Doctor is with Vicky, and how Vicky developed, that is what should have happened with Susan. Maybe they learned the lesson.
Well, also,
I don't want to be insulting when I say this. I think Vicky was much better in that in that crew position than Susan was. Much more so.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that they kind of were dropping little tidbits in that season as well was where they came from. And that never really went anywhere until it was picked up essentially in the war games, wasn't it? You know, where we got that answer. But from that production team at the time, that you could tell that they were going to go somewhere with that at some point, because they kept dropping it in there, and Susan kept mentioning about, you know, going home and those sort of conversations.
And I just love the little subtle hints to what may be going on, which is really nice.
And I think
I would actually argue, John, that it wasn't until the war games, I think, you know, in Tomb of the Cybermen, you know, they have that incredible, you know, moment with the Doctor and Victoria talking about his family.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's beautiful.
That would be like the next time I think they really deal with it.
Yeah, true.
Well, there's that beautiful speech in the massacre that Hartnell has, reminiscing about.
Oh, yes.
Good point.
That's why I actually want to. That's my most. If I had to pick one 60s story to be returned, it would be that one. Only just so I could see that last scene.
Just a speech,
Yeah.
Oh, it's heartbreaking, and again, when you see how far the Doctor has come by this point. I mean, he is heartbroken when Stephen walks out.
It's you know, you get to the end of that last story, the Reign of Terror, and you know, I've revised my view on it, because before, when we did Reign of Terror review, I said that I absolutely adore it. I still like it, but there are a lot of sections that just don't go anywhere that they could clip out of it easily. I think, but I do think you finish that story with looking back on season 1 with this Doctor that is just ready to go. You know, he's really on top form after that story and that season. He's just, you know, it must have been an absolute joy for people to watch this for the first time, to finish that first season, and then just.
And that little speech he's got, kind of signing off at the end, you know. Our lives are important. That's a lovely little moment, isn't it?
Yeah, they do that at the end of season 2.
With faces.
The same thing at the end of the time.
And again, we've talked about on all the reviews, the thing that works so well in that first season as well is they cannot get back to the TARDIS. There's something blocking them in all those stories, and it just works wonderfully. You know, they're pushed into something that they don't want to be involved in. And that goes back to what I said earlier, you know, where the Doctor doesn't necessarily want to be involved in things. He's just curious. He, as you said, Gary, he's a traveller, but he is forced into that position with the crew because of something stopping them getting back in and clearing off, which helps us as the audience as well.
Yes.
Like you said,
even when that doesn't happen, John, the good thing about it, the Doctor's a rotten driver, so they can't get anywhere anyway.
And see, that's one other reason why I think the historical stories work better, because I think I said this when we were talking about the Aztecs. I think that the crew is never in any bigger danger than in the historical stories. Because the antagonists they're fighting about are either, you know, to, you know, preserve their own culture, or because they have, like in Marco Polo, they have their own plan, so they're already automatically suspicious of who these people are. And in all of these historical stories, just saying like the one wrong thing increases your danger. Like I was saying in the Aztecs, how Susan is stupid to say, well, I'm not going to marry. You know, it's like, just go along with it go along with everything until you can get out of there. Don't go, well, I'm not going to, which means now you're going to have to go out and be dragged in front of the crowd and be, it's like, just keep your mouth shut. Don't say the wrong, like when Barbara, I said, there's no more colossally stupid thing that Barbara says in the Aztecs other than I'm not Yetaxa.
I know.
It's like, why in the world would you say something
not
so
only one
stupid?
I mean, the Doctor made Coco and got engaged. How stupid is that?
Yeah, but I mean, to the person you know is already trying to undermine you and bring you down, why you would admit that? It's like, but the danger is real. I mean, a lot of times, like Reign of Terror, like, Yeah, it's Reign of Terror is back and forth. It's like, oh, back to the prison.
Gonna lose your head.
Now I'm going back to the prison. Oh, I got to go out. No, I'm back to the prison. It's
You
like
get fed
back
up
and
for seeing that prison sign, don't you?
Yeah. But their danger, like I said, I think that, and even during the time of Reign of Terror, I thought it would have been better, like for when they're looking out the window in the cells, when it's Barbara and Susan at one point, and then Ian, they should have gone to, even if it would have been some kind of, I don't know, stock footage, to get a glimpse of what they're seeing, because then that would actually, for the audience, heighten, other than being told and relying on our own knowledge of what they're probably seeing in the square with the guillotine and everything, you know.
Yeah.
But like I said, that's when their danger is the most real. And maybe that's why a lot of the more kind of science fiction-y stories just seem kind of like old-fashioned 50s kind of, bug-eyed monsters type of,
I would also say, Gary and guys, I would also say for season 1, and we've talked about this before, I love how they establish, unlike now, where they're just stories, they're not universe-shattering events. You know, they're contained in that story. Whether they win or lose, the universe will go on, and the historicals in particular. Whereas now it would be like, oh, they've got to stop the gimmicky jig, otherwise it's going to wipe out half of the universe, sort of thing.
All reality.
Exactly. Yeah,
you just get numb to it. And it's got to get bigger and bigger. No,
there's nowhere to go, is there? That's the thing.
No.
The death of death is life.
That's very deep.
I did appreciate, though, that the fact that even considering the time that it was made, they did go to the effort of making what the goals were in each story unique. Like Unearthly Child was just survival. Like, we got to get out of here.
Yeah.
With the Daleks, it became more of, at one point, then it's like helping the Thals. It's not just escaping. It's about, no, we have a duty to help these people, fight the Daleks. With Marco Polo was more of like a travel log until they can get the key back to escape, but it was more kind of like a leisurely travel log with occasional danger. With the Keys of Marinus, it's more, well, they physically can't escape until they get all the keys and then the individual dangers of each of the places they went to. With Aztecs, it was more of, well, we got to keep playing along until we can figure out how to get back to the TARDIS. And, with the Sensorites, then it became about, well, Ian's sick and there's a monster. So, what should we do? And the Reign of Terror was more, again, kind of, freeing everybody. So there were some similarities to the goals, but there was some effort made to make what they needed to do in each story kind of unique. It wasn't like the same story beats, just in different places.
Yeah,
I love the idea, and they did it. Russell copied it in 2005. The idea of doing this historic future sideways type stuff, different stories every week. That made a lot of variety, I think, which is really, and they carry that right through the series, certainly for the 60s stuff.
Yeah, and I was going to say to you all as well. I also want to and see what you all think for yourselves as well. But I also want to sort of just highlight some of my iconic scenes from season 1. And I think so, working up, to the top, I'd say that, the friendship of the Doctor with Kublai Khan is an absolute treasure for me. Yeah. It's just good fun. It's funny. I love it to bits. I would also say, probably, I'm going to say 2 for me is going to be the first images of the Daleks. Is incredible. I that's never going to get old for me. But I can't go any other way than to say the first shot and the first look inside the TARDIS when they go through the doors. I mean, for me, you can't choose anything other than that for one It's so good. What does everyone else
imagine what that'd be like seeing it for the first time, John? Having that, not being aware of that at all. That must have been amazing.
I think you're right, Paul, because when it came back in 2005, and I remember my nieces sitting down, and part of me was like, please let them like it. Please let them like it. But the other part of me was, I can't wait to see what they think of the TARDIS, and I saw their reactions for that first time when Rose goes round the TARDIS and then goes inside of it, and they were absolutely blown away with it. And I can imagine it was like that. And, we've all had those moments when we first come to Doctor Who where we see the TARDIS for the first time. And it's just, I still think there is not a better ship in sci-fi than the TARDIS.
Talking of the TARDIS, wonderful. One of my favourite shots is the original takeoff in episode 1.
Yeah.
That's superbly shot. Brilliant.
Yeah. But the takeoff from BBC.
I wish they'd kept that. It would have got expensive though.
Yeah.
They took off from BBC Television Centre as well.
That's what it looked like. Yeah.
Oh God!
But just the time motor going up and down, all the lights flashing, people being thrown about, super stuff. But,
and I do have a chuckle still about that first story, where the Doctor shocks Ian on the console. I do have a little naughty Doctor.
Yeah.
Forget your turkey. He shocks him.
The Master would be more friendly if they came round to the TARDIS, not like the Doctor.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right. I mean, that I think you said in one of the other reviews we did, but that would be interesting, wouldn't it? If the Master had turned up in season 1, the conversations between that early Doctor with the Master would be quite interesting, because the Doctor's not overly nice at the beginning of that season, is he? So, I could see them wiping out an entire planet and skipping and folding hands, Oh, sorry. So that's New Who. That's New Who. I mean, has anyone else got any sort of special moments or mentions from season 1?
Well, one of the ones I particularly liked it's more of a character moment. Is all those great scenes that Doctor has with the jailer in Main Affair. Those scenes are hilarious, absolutely brilliant. And the way Hartnell plays this official, when he's got the hat and the sash and everything, is superb. And Hartnell's loving every minute of it. It's really nice. Yeah.
Isn't that the commonality of all the great scenes in this season involves sashes?
Well, I just fancy dress in general. Yeah, Paul, that would have been my go-to. I mean, from the very start, I love the scene when the Doctor's on the road and he gets stopped for interview.
It's great. He bludgeons someone over the head.
Yeah.
With a spade. Yeah. Incredible. Yeah.
But again, it's his facial expressions, and he's so sure of himself, and then the tables just turn quick as that, and then he's got to carry that show, and then going into the tailors, and bluffing his way in before you even get to that wonderful reveal with that gorgeous costume. Trying to think of the iconic scene. Barbara in the Goddess, the Ataxa headdress. I mean, she just looks incredible.
I will also make a mention as well about at the end of Edge of Destruction, where you've got Barbara and the Doctor talking.
I was going to mention that. That's a very key moment.
Yeah, it's lovely. And
I was just going to say for the scene that Paul was talking about, where he picks up the spade and hits the guy. They should have tied it back to the first story and had him pick up a rock.
Yeah,
that would have tied it back to the first story. Brought everything full circle.
Did you want a bit of gore as well? Did you want a bit of blood spatter?
Where he's just going, and just kind of like leaving nothing there.
This is now a mature sci-fi show.
Mature sci-fi. I also like in the Daleks. And it's a beautiful moment, but at the end when they've defeated the Daleks and the Doctor says, "You want advice? I never give it." Like, yes, you do.
Yeah,
you never shut up.
Get that lie on, yeah.
It's just...
Yeah, I again, that's an iconic bit as well at the in the Daleks as well, where the Dalek's dying, and he's like, "I couldn't even help you if I wanted to," essentially, and that sort of death cry from the Dalek at the end is also iconic, and similar to what you said a few minutes ago, Paul, about imagine watching that for the first time, because they probably thought at that point, that's it, that's the last we'll see of the Daleks, you know. So it's really well done, but you're right, he does love to play up, doesn't he, the Doctor? You know, he's just, "Oh yeah, I don't give advice." You flipping do when you're not in the mood.
It always makes me laugh, this misconception, and I had it myself coming in to 62, that the Doctor is this crotchety man. And he's for a couple of episodes, but nothing could be further from the truth. He's got that twinkle in his eye. Yeah. He's a right little rogue.
Little laughter of him as well, you know. Just
there's the scene of the scene in the Aztecs. You mentioned the great scene with from Edge of Destruction with Barbara and the Doctor. Also, the whole "you can't change history" is really well written, because it shows, because it intimates that the Doctor knows that, because he probably learned a hard lesson that you can't change history. It's not like just some line of philosophy that he's spouting off. You get the idea that maybe he himself was in her position at some point and had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. Also, he actually did change history, and the repercussions of that were quite traumatic, you know, so that's another possibility, isn't it?
You know, and the scene with, of course, the great scene at the end where he goes back and he picks up Kamika's ring and takes it with him.
Lovely touch.
It says, you know, it's a quiet scene, but it says, you know, it shouts multitudes. And so, the quiet moments are the ones that really stick with me.
I think you're right, Garrett. I think there's some
where he says goodbye to the boy that saved his life from the fire.
He's
like, see you later. Bye. Yeah. You know, he's like that. You know,
high five. Exactly.
Going back to what Sarah said, I do agree with the fact that Hartnell got a twinkle. He is grumpy and nasty at points, but he's lovable. He's lovable. That's the thing. Yeah.
And that's the thing. You know, if he wasn't lovable, it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have carried on, would it?
I saw an interview with Jonathan Harris from Lost in Space, who played Dr. Zachary Smith. Mm-hmm. And in an interview, he started off in the scene as being really quite a dark villain. Then they made him more comedic. And I think that's kind of what Hartnell did a little bit, realizing you couldn't sustain that all the time.
Yeah.
And they made him a lot warmer. And that's, I think, the same thing he did, you know?
The thing with Dr. Smith, though, is because they made him all comic.
Yeah. That was
it went from being the antagonist to being like the comic relief with the robot. Yeah. Like, dear.
If the Doctor had stayed gruff and, you know, crotchety and unpleasant, kids wouldn't have latched onto him. Yeah. And that's another reason why, you know, I mean, apart from the Daleks, you've got to be invested in these characters.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've seen them lovely scenes, you know, photographs, and obviously in Adventure in Space of Time.
Yeah.
Kids flock to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's just, I just don't think it would have worked if he carried on playing it as he was playing it.
No, I agree.
And did any of you get the sense that, I mean, watching these in order, that Hartnell seemed to feel more comfortable with the historicals than with the
absolutely,
you know, technobabble stuff like the censor rights or
without a doubt. And I think they, it's what I was saying earlier about they were struggling with the sci-fi, you know, the futuristic elements of it, definitely. But I think the historicals, you can tell Hartnell's having a joy of a time. Yeah, you know, he is really in his zone in those historicals. And I mean, we've talked about it on some of our reviews, but when you compare it to New Who, certainly now, you see just how good the writing is. That some of these stories in season 1, I think I've said to you before, I'll put the phone down. The phone will be off, and I'll be transported into these stories, and I'll love them from the first moment to the end of it, and I never get tired of them. Whereas New Who, if I dare watch it, I'm looking at the phone, I'm skimming through the phone. That's for me.
Checking your watch. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's for me the tell of what is a great story and what is a great season. And again, they set they did what was necessary in season 1. They laid the foundations, and then you move on to season 2, where I just think it's soaring at that point.
What they did, John, I said this many times before, I think I've probably said it in all the reviews, but they gave it credibility. They played it really straight, regardless how stupid the situations are. They were credible, and they made the situations credible because they played it straight.
Yeah.
The one thing that they were still, I think, trying to find their way is making the longer stories, like sustaining the drama for the longer stories, because I think all of the stories that are in this season that are longer than 4 parts really could easily lose, at least an episode. Keys of Marinus is kind of different because that's kind of almost like a bunch of single episode stories tied together with the search for the keys. So that almost doesn't even really count. But the other ones, like, Daleks or Sensorites or Reign of Terror, can, meander a little bit.
It's fascinating, this series. And again, what you were saying, John, about laying the foundations, but it's unique, and it's an episodic, set of stories, but it's also like an anthology, because again, every story is different, and Keys of Marinus takes that to the extreme, where it's literally every episode is a different genre. You're playing with so much. I mean, I think it's a miracle that it did stay on the track as well as it did.
Sure.
It's I mean, again, when you were saying, Gary, a few minutes ago about the fact one of the key scenes in that season 1 is the Aztecs were about the fixed points in time. You talk about these things, but this set the standard for going forward in Doctor Who, and I would argue in other shows as well, about fixed points in time. You can't mess with them. It's brilliantly written, and I think going forward, I just wish we had writers that were at this level now, because we're sorely lacking, unfortunately, in my opinion. But,
well, it's that thing of write what you know. The writers in the 60s, they were interested in history, so they know. So they know it like the back of the hand. The only limit was really budget, I suppose. Whereas now it's. You just get, it's anybody who's available.
I think you're right, Sarah. I think because, I think I watched one of the extras. I think Terrence Dix was saying about, for one of the stories they asked him to make, and he had to go away and get a book and read the book and do his research to effectively come up with
Lighthouses, I think it's called.
That's the one. That's the one. And I think, now I think this is, arguably why things are a bit lazier, is because they'll go on Google or ChatGPT, and they'll go, right, tell us about the Victorian era, and that's it. They'll quickly skim a few things and do a story about it, and it'll be very, it'll be rough. It'll be very loose. Not mentioning Rogue.
That's
yeah.
Well, the other thing is that, like in the 60s, especially in the 50s, but in the 60s too, I mean, the television writers, it was still a relatively new medium. So the television writers were drawing on their own. They had experience, writing and working in theater, or, for other television production, films, books.
Yeah.
So they were drawing on like a wide swath of personal experience in different types of writing. Now, and I'm trying not to paint with too broad a brush, for the most part, writers really are only drawing like on other TV shows they've seen or other tropes that have been done 10 million times or whatever. There's not that kind of breadth that, most of the writers today, and again, not trying to go too broad, are drawing on in comparison. That's why a lot of the stuff today, and I'm not talking about just Doctor Who, although current Doctor Who clearly is guilty of that, but they're drawing like from a really shallow pool of what they're calling on to do their work.
I think you're right, Gary, and I would say, it's not Doctor Who, but I remember watching documentaries on Gene Roddenberry, and Gene Roddenberry was a fighter pilot in the war, and he was a police officer, and he had life experience like a lot of these writers had, but also from watching a lot of these documentaries as well, they came to TV and movies writing scripts as if they were writing a novel. Structure it correctly, whereas you're right now, you don't get that. It's literally, there's more focus on the CGI aspect of it. Let's impress the audience with these images. Flash, look at this, not what is actually being written. Exactly. So
I think there's a lot of lack of originality these days, which is part of the problem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so has anyone got any final thoughts on season one?
One thing, and again, it's interesting to think, we've been talking about season one, obviously, that ended with, as Paul said, that great kind of, philosophical moment. But interesting to note, can't forget that originally this season was filmed and envisioned with the next two stories as part of the block to complete it.
Yeah.
So it was only their decision to kind of, bring the Planet of Giants and Daleks Invasion of Earth into the next season. But otherwise, in many ways, they're still the kind of concluding components for season one. So it's easy to see that, at the end of Reign of Terror, would lead right directly into Planet of Giants. And then, of course, the season kind of concludes with Susan leaving and a return of, the big villain. So
spoilers.
But again, I mean, so honestly, I think I mentally kind of, I add those next two stories into season one, since that's the kind of big block narratively that kind of ends with, Susan's departure.
Yeah. I see where you're coming from. And I think for me that I think it was the right move as well, don't you? I mean, by the fact that I think it must, again, going back to watching it for the first time, it must have been great when you get to season two and you see the Daleks are back, and must have been wonderful.
I mean, would it have had the same effect if we'd had a second Dalek story at the end? It's interesting.
Yeah.
To hypothesize, or is it because they only appeared in that first story?
I think spreading out a little longer probably helped it for me. I would think that would probably be the case. But anyone else got any tidbits? I mean, Gary's obsessed with one sash. We've talked about that. He's ordered the outfit. He was going to wear it today, but
I'm so disappointed, Gary.
I'm still for the return to the Revenge of One Sash. I think should have been a season 2 story.
He's going to be sat on the TARDIS.
That's just before we know it.
Yeah.
That's all.
He's sitting on the top of the TARDIS, still waiting for his revenge.
Just trimming his beard.
It's true.
For centuries.
I mean, but as John said during our review, that maybe we haven't talked about like cringy. I know we're trying to be upbeat and positive about what is a wonderful season, so we're not talking about like cringy moments. But the fact that you have a whole alien race where it's impossible for them to tell each other apart, and clearly we can tell each other, we can tell them apart. What's your name for the big guy?
Oh, well, beer gut sensorite.
What?
Beer gut sensorite.
Beer gut sensorite. Well, it's like, oh, you look just like him over there.
Yeah.
That probably is just like the most kind of groan-inducing part.
You've given me an idea, Gary, for New Who now about sensorites coming back, and one sash is like the TARDIS lands in the snow and they come back later and they just find these footprints that are just big circles that look like giant chocolate buttons have been put down on the ground, and they're like, it could only be one thing. One sash is returned.
He's in a bar somewhere.
Yeah.
Doing the silent disco.
Yeah. He's all this time he's been sat in his secret room where he's got an actual laser weapon that vaporizes people from a distance.
And sharks with lasers on their heads.
He was and now I'm thinking this should be like a crossover between Bond. It'd be a brilliant Bond villain,
or stroking a white cat in a lair.
You know what they can do? Gather all the characters from this season that ended up in exile. Yeah. The guy from Aztecs at the end, the poor man, what was his name, who went into self-exile? Then you have one sash. All these people are in, I think there was one of the cavemen went into exile. You gather all the exile season one together and band together.
Yeah. Let's do it.
That's a fanfic story.
Like sex or something like that. Yeah.
All on the TARDIS roof.
Yes.
Holding
ready
hands.
to show I suppose my only final thought is, Ian and Barbara spent so long trying to get home. Oh, there's that tease at the start of Reign of Terror that they might actually be back. How would you have felt if they had have gone in that first season?
I think they were essential to that first season.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it would work without them, but it's kind of, that's one thing I think about, I call it like the Star Trek Voyager effect with them trying to get home. It's like, every week, they're not going to get home.
Right. So why even bother?
Yeah, exactly.
And Sarah's exactly right. I mean, you notice, it does come up at the beginning of Reign of Terror, with that completely forced cliffhanger of, oh, well, okay, I'm going to go drop you off. It's like, oh, come on. Yeah. They didn't say anything that warranted the Doctor flying off the handle like that and threatening to put him off. But that being the case, them getting home became less of a part of the story as the season went on. It wasn't about,
it's about
it should be. It wasn't, it's like focus on the adventure. It's about the adventure, which is one of the reasons why I think New Who, I would say, is the biggest way that New Who collectively has gone off track. It's not about the Doctor. It's about the adventures that they're on. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that their whole, every story didn't start with, are we back? Are we back on Earth? Are we back on?
Yeah.
They didn't even mention it after a while. And that's the right way to go.
And you're right, Gary. And another thing that I compare New Who with this is the fact that in New Who, they've made it so wherever the Doctor lands, he pretty much knows exactly where he is straight away. Mm. Classic. This Who is they don't know where they are.
And
everything's fresh. That's what is missing in New Who. It's
I was going to say,
and like the viewer, we're discovering it with them, which is really interesting.
This isn't a season. This isn't a season one thing, but when Matt Smith regenerated into Capaldi, and Capaldi said, just one question, do you know how to fly this thing? I honestly, and this is the truth, I was so hoping that one of the things at least they do for the initial part of Capaldi is because since that he would have lost, maybe because it was his first of a new regeneration cycle, that they would go back to the Hartnell Troughton trope of not exactly knowing how to fly and control the truck. I thought that would have been, after all these many years of him, as Tom Baker once said, now it's a number 9 bus, because he can drive it anywhere.
Yeah.
Get back to the idea of you have this incredible machine, but you're not exactly sure how to control it. I so wish they had gone that way with Capaldi.
Oh, I'd love that.
That'd be lovely. Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I thought they were with that line. I thought, go
would have
for
been
it.
brilliant.
Just,
Yeah. And what did we get instead? We got a guy in underpants regenerating out of some guy's pee-pee. So, we won, didn't we?
Is that where it came from? Okay.
Yeah, that's where it came from.
Okay.
That's where it came from. Yeah,
that's where all
it's
the
been
CGI,
analysed.
that's where all the CGI effect was located.
Yeah.
We have ladies present, guys. It's like, come on, watch your language.
No, listen, I'm the only woman in my unit. I'm used.
You got to be joking. Sarah's worse than all of us.
Yeah,
it's all right. This is going out at 2 a.m. Anyway.
it's a little bit of PP is not gonna put me off.
Can we
leave that line in the director's cut?
Yeah. It wasn't the PP that put me off, to be honest with you.
No,
it could be much worse, to be fair.
Yeah,
it could have been a lot worse.
and it still could.
It still could.
Well, it probably will be as well. Yeah.
No, that's our review of season 1, everyone. Thanks for being with us on this journey.
Oh, can I one last thing? Sorry. This is a plea to whoever's watching this. If you actually have in your little attic library in a box somewhere, if you have the actual episodes of Marco Polo, would you please contact us through the comments below, and we can work. Nobody else has to know. We can work some kind of deal, one of the 4 of us, to kind of get copies of that story. So if you happen to have the film reels in your attic, please contact us. We'll work a good deal. We'll work a nice deal. That's my message.
It's been an absolute joy doing these reviews. In the next few weeks, we will be putting out the season 2 reviews. So we're not finished yet. We've got a long way to go until we have to get to that horrible season that we will not discuss.
Well, tune in as we discuss what Barbara and Ian were really doing at that villa in the Romans. That'll be a nice discussion.
Yeah. And it's
Ian and his pants.
Yeah. And until next time, have a good week, and we'll see you soon. Take care, all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.